Company of Makers. Podcast talks, workshops.
This series is dedicated to those who served in Op Telic and their families, marking the 20th anniversary of the commencement of operations. Each episode, we'll talk to members of the armed forces community who served in Op Telic, or whose lives have been directly impacted. These are true life accounts, and these personal stories may be emotionally challenging to hear. If you feel you may be sensitive to this, you may prefer not to listen.
Welcome to Land, Sea and Air. I'm Steve Bomford, co-founder of Company of Makers.
And I'm Tip Cullen, an actor and former Royal Marines Commando.
And on this episode, we're talking to Andy Merry, and he's an oppo of yours, Tip.
Yeah, a great oppo. Me and Andy go a long way back in our time in the Royal Marines, and we shared a lot of the same sand and operations over the years.
And this is a fascinating story of kind of the realities of the first phases of Op Telic.
On the spectrum of the operation, this is quite a unique story, a one-off story, but every person's story is quite unique. But what Andy says and the challenges he faced on the ground and afterwards, I think it's a story just well worth telling.
I couldn't agree more. Let's give him a listen. Andy, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the podcast.
My pleasure.
So, as you know, we're here to talk about Op Telic. But I'd just like to know what was your role in the Royal Marines and where were you when you found out you were off to Iraq?
So I was a troop sergeant in B Company, the 40 Commando, based in Taunton. And I was a heavy weapons specialist, so my responsibilities were the Milan, as it was then, anti-tank missile system, and the .5 heavy machine guns. Bravo Company at the time was called what was it called? A standoff company, I think they used to call it. I can't remember. A standoff company, so you had two companies of riflemen. They were close combat companies, and then two companies of basically guys with support weapons.
Right.
So we had a troop of Milans, a troop of .5s, and a troop of infantry. An infantry troop in B Company.
Okay. And Iraq, when did that first come on your radar?
I can't remember. I know we sailed in January, so I think probably pre-Christmas there was a lot of discussion about it. I remember at the time there was a lot of protests in this country. Even my own mum, who is a staunch supporter of the Royal Marines, marrying one and having two as sons. I think even she took part in the anti-war marches in London. I think it was 1 million people, was it, or something, marched in London against the war. And I can't remember when they were. They may even have happened after we sailed. I can't remember. But I know we sailed in January from Plymouth. So we must have known a little bit about it in December, I would imagine. I'd had a back operation actually in October. And the Commando deployed to America, to 29 Palms in America, and I was gutted to have missed that. So I think when the talk started of sailing off to war, I certainly made myself get better a lot quicker than perhaps the doctors would have liked.
Okay, so we have a chat before we record these. I mean, I mentioned this to the listeners anyway, so they generally know that we've had a chat already. That's the first time you've mentioned about your mum on the protest, and you're not the first person to have said this. So there were people being deployed and really close family members protesting. And this is not meant to be a political podcast, but just how did that make you feel? Is there a bit of a conflict there, even emotions?
No, because I know my mum very well, and I know she would support military 100%, always has done. But I don't know what made her go and do that. She was probably worried about me, her son, going off to war. Is probably the only thing that was concerning her. So I guess she felt that by marching in a thing that she could maybe just stop me going. I don't think she was really bothered from any political point of view.
Okay.
But surprised, actually, I was really surprised that my mum would do that.
Well, she's still looking after you, wasn't she? I suppose. Let's take it as that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I don't think there was any. I literally don't think there was anything more to it. I don't think it was political. It's just she didn't want me to go.
That was the last gasp of trying to stop you going. But anyway, that's mum's for you. So you set sail And what happened next?
So we set sail, and everyone was excited, but nothing was, nothing was guaranteed. It's one of those, are we or aren't we? But as far as we were concerned, we were. So we trained accordingly. So I think we sailed from Plymouth. I can't remember the exact date. I'm pretty sure it was January. And we headed off to Cyprus. Was the first place that we headed off to. So it's the normal routine on ship. It was just training. We were just up on the flight deck every day doing physical training, getting our weapon systems out, and just really, although we know our way around those weapon systems, but it was with this specific group of men that I had, make sure they were up to speed, get them as good as they could possibly be, and just sort of preparing for all eventualities, really. And I think Cyprus, there was a big exercise that we did in Cyprus, and it was good to get off the ship. It was good to shake ourselves out, and that would be the first time as a troop, really, that we actually did anything. We had a new troop officer. There was a couple of us more senior sergeants, and it was just building that relationship. Getting him to trust us, us to trust him. I knew a lot of the lads anyway, and so it was just, and we've all been through this loads of times before on pre-deployments. Anyway, we've been, any time we spent on ship, it's kind of the same routine. There just seemed to be a little bit more of a sense of urgency, I suppose, about it. And we weren't. I don't think at this stage we knew where exactly we were going to go. Obviously, we were heading to Iraq, but we didn't know exactly what we would be doing, where we'd be doing it. So it was more generic training, really. We had some American Marines attached to us. They're called Anglicos. I can't remember what that stands for. In there somewhere is Naval Gunfire Liaison Officers or something. Air Naval Gunfire Liaison Officers. So they were the guys on the end of the radio. So should we need naval gunfire support or air support from the Americans, then these guys were the ones that could talk to those assets. So it was good to shake out with them, and we sort of integrated them into our company. They were good lads, actually. They were really good lads. And then I think there was an issue with the Red Arrows, which I won't be very popular for saying this, and I don't know what the truth of the story is, but the rumour that went round is that the Red Arrows were out in Cyprus doing their winter practice for their summer season, and the station commander at the base in Cyprus didn't want our helicopters flying around because the Red Arrows needed to practice. And apparently he was told in no uncertain terms to wind his neck in. We're sailing off to war. Never mind your pretty boys in red planes. This is a little bit more important. So I don't know the truth of that. But we never did see the Red Arrows anyway when we were there.
So I thought you were going to say they were going to be used for laying down smoke or something.
No such luck. I know they do go out there to train. So what the truth of the whole story, I don't know. I think there was a readjustment of ship. I think because when we sailed, it wasn't quite like the Falklands where it was a real sort of crash move. But I think the ships were loaded kind of a little bit quicker than perhaps they would have liked. And so I think there was a redistribution of stores, make sure that the right stores are in the right place. Because of course, amphibious warfare, that's the complication, is the coordination of all this stuff. What comes off first needs to go on first, of course. So there's a little bit of that. And we also did some live firing. And I remember we were a little bit concerned because our heavy machine guns, the ammunition that we were given was awful. And bearing in mind, it was, we were on the range to fire machine guns. It sounded like a rifle range. So they'd fire one round, maybe two, and then stop. And we could not get these guns working. And we tracked it down to the ammunition. The ammunition was just awful. So this made us a little bit worried because we were potentially going to war with ammunition that simply didn't work in our guns. And so I know there was some sort of moves to get that sorted out, and it eventually was sorted out. I think the ammunition was a typically cheap substitute for what we should have been having, and clearly the cheap substitute just did not work. It literally didn't work. So it wasn't anything we were doing wrong. It wasn't anything wrong with the guns. It was the ammunition that was awful.
So you got the Chinese import ammunition.
Possibly, I don't know where. It was probably British ammunition. We needed some American. I don't know. But yeah, so I remember that going on. And then eventually, I think we were only there for a few days. I don't remember it being a long time, very long. And then we sailed off towards the Gulf. And of course, the closer we got to the Gulf, the more real it all got, the more likely it was that we were going to go and do something. So we started doing a bit more detailed planning. I think by this time, we knew exactly where we were going to go. and what our potential roles were. So we were able to start planning in more detail, and particularly as an anti-tank senior NCO, these weapon systems, it's not a case of just plonking them on the floor somewhere. They need to be sighted. You need to cover the area to the weapon system's best ability. So you need to be able to interlock in arcs and to cover the area that you're actually trying to defend, and coordinate those with the machine guns as well. Two very different weapon systems, two very capable weapon systems, but they need to be coordinated. So there's a lot of that going on. And luckily for us, we didn't have any maps at all. We just had naval charts. So we had to try and sight weapon systems just from a naval chart, which is not the easiest thing to do. And I'm pleased to say that on the day of the race, we actually sighted them exactly where they needed to be just off that chart. So I'm quite proud of that. So there was a lot of that sort of stuff going on. And then I remember the command team flew forward to Kuwait. And I was asked to go with them because of my anti-tank specialisation, to advise the company commander on coordination of these weapon systems. So we went to Kuwait. Again, I don't remember the timelines of this at all. So we flew to Kuwait, and it became apparent while we were there that some members of the company would be detached from us and attached to the US Navy SEALs, or SEAL Team 3, because there were so on the Al-Faw Peninsula, which is where we ultimately ended up. So I think we knew now that that's where we were going. It's the very southeastern tip of Iraq. Mm-hmm. There's a massive oil infrastructure called the MMS, the Manifold Metering Station, and so that needed to be captured. That was given, I think, to Charlie Company of 40 Commando, because it's a big area to capture, and the majority of the SEAL team was also involved in that. And then there were two, they were called PPLs. One was the MAOT and one was the KOT. I have no idea what that stands for. Pipeline, I think, is the PPL. But basically, all the oil was pumped into the manifold and metering station from the various oil fields around Iraq. From there, it was then pumped down two pipelines to these two PPLs. And then from there, it was pumped out to sea to some platforms out at sea where the oil tankers could come alongside and be loaded up with the oil. So we used to joke that we're not here in any way to capture the oil. This is all about Saddam Hussein and getting rid of him. But come on, there was a big effort there to capture this oil infrastructure intact. So make of that as you will.
But it's also very vulnerable infrastructure, I would have thought. Yeah,
very vulnerable. And I think, I don't think it was there. Well, I don't know. Maybe it was there for us the West, to get some more oil out of it. But certainly, I know if you remember in the first Gulf War, Saddam Hussein set fire to a lot of the oil wells.
Yeah.
It was a big disaster. So I think they were keen to prevent something like that. And also, once Iraq was invaded, relieved of Saddam Hussein, the idea, I guess, was to get it back on its feet, and the oil was its biggest export and the biggest source of revenue. So, pretty important stuff. However cynically you want to look at it, it was pretty important to capture these oil infrastructures. So the guys from, I think there was 17, there was a couple of corporals and the rest of them Marines from B Company who were going to go and be detached from us to the SEALs. And half, they were going to split in half, and each half, along with a small team of SEALs, were then going to assault these two PPLs and capture them. And so I sort of just went along out of interest, really. I had nothing else to do. I'd done my bit with the company commander. And I just got chatting to the SEAL team chief. It's like their sergeant major, for want of a better word. We were similar sort of age, similar crustiness in our respective jobs. And we got chatting, and he said, "So how come you're not doing this?" I said, "Well, I'm not. That's not my job. I'm here to coordinate heavy weapons." And he went, "No, mate, you should come. You should come and join us." And I said, "Well, that'd be lovely, thank you. But that's really not my decision. You need to speak to my company commander." And that's exactly what he did. He went and spoke to the company commander, and I have no idea how he convinced him that I would be better suited being attached to SEAL Team 3. And much to my surprise, that's where I think, I can't remember if I went back to the ship to get my kit or I stayed there. I can't remember. But I suddenly found myself now attached to SEAL Team 3. with these other 17 corporals and Marines. And by this time, I'd been promoted as well, so I was now a colour sergeant. And I was really nervous at the fact that I'd been promoted. They're going to move me on somewhere else, and I'd missed the whole thing. But I managed to slip under the radar somehow. And as a colour sergeant, I ended up doing a rifle section commander's job, which is, if I'm honest, that's what everybody joins the Royal Marines to do. So I was commanding men as I should have been doing as a corporal, as I did as a corporal. But I was now doing it as a colour sergeant, and it was just amazing. It was just brilliant. I loved it. It was so cool. Because there was no admin involved. I didn't have to do any sort of admin or look after anybody beyond what I would do normally. I was just a corporal now. I think arguably a corporal is one of the best jobs in the Royal Marines by far. Maybe sergeant, but I loved being a corporal. And there I was as a colour sergeant doing it again. It was great. So that was it. So I stayed there in Kuwait with the SEALs. And they were good lads. They were really good fun, actually. They were interesting. They were very American, of course, and they're SEALs, so they are. They think the sun shines out of their backside, and why not? They're good guys. They were good operators as well, and we were totally integrated in with them. We would do PT with them. We'd train with them all day long. We'd socialise with them in the evenings, and it was a good time actually. We swapped kit because. Any Royal Marine will tell you American kit's far better than ours. I'm not sure the truth of that, but maybe at the time it was. We were practically looking like SEALs by the end of the time, but then we were wearing all their kit and everything. But they've got a very different way of doing things to us. They're very gung ho, and sometimes it felt like they just needed to sit back for a little bit and maybe think about things a little bit more. And I remember they had a massive briefing for the whole of the team. When I say team, this is almost like a company plus size, 60, 70, 80 guys in the team. And they sat with their commander and they were having a brief because the place that we attacked, the Chaot, or the one I attacked, was a bit of an enigma. It's about the same size as a football pitch, I reckon, with what looked like a sort of, I don't know, an upside down V shape, and that was the pipeline that's then disappeared under the ground. And then there was a concrete bunker in one corner, and these obviously they had all sorts of satellite imagery of this target, and it seemed almost daily that this bunker would be getting bigger and bigger and bigger. They were obviously doing something to it, and it was obviously important. And so that really became something that we were particularly worried about, because what is this bunker? Why are they building it so much and so strongly? And also off to the east of this place was a massive, and it was big. It was a huge Iraqi army camp, and you remember the Iran-Iraq war, and this area had been fought over absolutely desperately. And it was almost a little bit of a First World War feeling about it. There was a lot of shell craters, and I know they'd used gas there as well. A lot of mustard gas was used in that war, and so this base, I think, was a relic of that. And in fact, Iran, you could see Iran from where we landed. And that was always a big issue. We were worried about stray rounds if we, going over into Iran and causing big diplomatic incidents, and we didn't really want Iran going to war with us either. So it's all quite complicated. But anyway, they were thinking about how they could put some eyes on this bunker thing that kept on growing. And so some of the ideas were extraordinary. So they discussed inserting a sniper into the area, and if you see the air photographs, the target was right on the edge of the land, but where they intended to insert this sniper was right out in the middle of the mudflats. And not only were they mudflats, but it was heavily mined. So they were saying, well, we can get a guy out there and he can crawl in and he can observe this. And I sort of put my hand up and said, well, firstly, is that not mined? And secondly, you might as well put a big sign above his head saying sniper here, because all they've got to do is look at the trail he's going to leave in the mud. And they're like, oh, yeah, that's fair enough. And then someone else suggested they call them DPVs, desert patrol vehicles. It looks like something out of the Banana Splits with a gun on the top. It really does. And they're very capable vehicles. And they said, well, why don't we put one of these on the berm that surrounded the Chaot, and we can sort of do stuff with that. And I said, well, hang on a minute, does that not have is the gun traversable on there? And they said, not really. And I said, well, what's the point of doing that? Because it can only shoot as it's going round and round in circles. They'll be absolutely used. And they were like, oh, God, yeah, that's it. And after the meeting, I said to the platoon commander of the particular group I was with, I said, look, would you like to know how I would do this? You know, I'm not saying I'm some brilliant tactician or anything like that, but I said that this is how I would do it. And we had a sandboard with a little model of the target. And I explained to him, it was very, very basic infantry tactics. I mean, it wasn't rocket science by any stretch of the imagination. I said, why don't we get out the back of the helicopter when we land? Because by this time we knew it was a heliborne assault. I'll put 4 men one side, 4 men the other side to form an L shape. You guys can come out behind us. If this big building gives us any trouble, I can just straighten that line so we can have all 8 weapons engaging whatever's in that building. If not, you know, you guys can fan out, you do what you need to do, and we can give you overwatch and protection like that. And he scratched his head and he went, that's brilliant. That's really, really good. And I was like, well, okay, yeah, all right. And it's literally very, very basic infantry tactics. It really wasn't a genius plan at all, but it was a simple, and that's the one we went with, believe it or not. We actually went along with that plan. And so we rehearsed most days. We built a mock-up's probably too strong a word. It was just a load of mine tape, but to the exact dimensions of where everything was. And we discussed where we were going to put the helicopter, how we were going to get out of the helicopter, where we were going to manoeuvre to, what was the priority. The priority was the pipeline, because, of course, they were worried about the Iraqis putting demolition charges on it. You know, so if they had, we need to get hold of those demolition charges before they have a chance to blow them, blah, blah, blah. And we need to secure the site in case there's a counterattack from this big army base off to the east. And then once that was secure, we could then call in the rest of the company, as in the Royal Marines. They would then come in, bring the remaining weapon systems, the ones that I'd cited, and then we would be ready to deal with anything any counterattack that came from the east. And then the SEALs would then, the plan was the helicopters would land, drop the rest of my company off. The SEALs would get on the helicopter, and then they disappear. And that was pretty much their war over, and that's exactly what happened. We had some good banter with the SEALs. They were one of them was called Chad, and I don't know if you know, but the word Chad in the Royal Marines means a bit rubbish. Something Chad, and so of course that never got boring. My name was very amusing to us, and bless him, he thought he was an LA gangster. He was covered in tattoos, and you know he was really gangster from LA. But I think he soon realised that perhaps he wasn't as gangster as he thought he was. Once the lads had got hold of him, there was guys. I mean, the weights they lifted was phenomenal. They were big into body image, you know, and they quite often challenge us to weightlifting competitions. And I'd say, listen, we're never going to beat you in weightlifting competitions. Look at the flipping size of you. But if you want, you can go for a run with us. We'll take you lads for a run, and we'll see who's better running. And they were like, oh no, we don't do running. So it was all very, good banter. We were lots of range days with them, lots of live firing. They'd fire our weapons, we'd fire their weapons. And they even had a weapon called the Carl Gustaf, which was a weapon we used in the 80s. Something that, I remember in training, and probably up to the mid to late 80s, we still had this weapon. It was a horrible thing. Big, heavy lump of metal that you took on exercise, but never fired because there's no blank ammunition for it. It was just horrible. And these guys had it. And I said, God, you've got to let me have a go at that. Let me have a go. I haven't seen one of these for years. So they've got a much lighter version, but it's exactly the same weapon. So I got down and was very excited about firing this weapon. And I pulled the trigger, squeezed the trigger, and it was just a click. It had a stoppage. And weirdly, I don't know where it came from, I knew exactly what the stoppage drill was, literally 15 years after I'd even seen one of these weapons. And they were looking at me with a bemused look on their face. How did you know how to do that? And I said, well, son, I've been using one of these since before you were born, sort of thing. Yeah, that was good fun. We had film nights each night with them. It was just a great time. And then I think it was the night before the war. In fact, I'll go back slightly. So when we were still on the ship, I think it's quite important to mention, and it was all to do with the protests as well, I think. Sorry, I forgot this bit. But I remember we had what's called a clear lower deck, which is an old naval term. So all the lower ranks come up top so that the officers can speak to them. And it's called that now. You don't necessarily have to go upstairs. But I think we were all formed up in the hangar deck of HMS Ocean. And they'd flown in, I'm going to say the second Sea Lord. I don't know, that might not be true, but he was certainly a very, very senior naval officer. And he basically said to everybody there, is everybody happy with what we're doing? Do you understand why we're doing this? And I think the hierarchy, the military hierarchy, might have been a little bit worried about the fact that, you know, we'd seen all these protests at home because, of course, we had TV and that on the ship and newspapers, etc. And so I think they were a little bit worried about us, perhaps not thinking that we were fighting a just war or whatever, whatever. You know, and again, nobody actually said it, but everyone was like, well, yeah, why? This is our job. What, you know, no one cares that we're here. This is brilliant. So I think they were a little bit nervous about that. So I'd never experienced that before or since. In fact, nobody's ever said to us, "Are you sure do you know why we're doing this?" So I suspect it was due to the strength of feeling back home. So sorry, that was.
I'm quite surprised at that, Andy. Do you know what I mean? I think it's like you said, it never happened since. And I think, you know, once obviously the wheels are set in motion for a military campaign, it's you can't just opt out of it, can you? It's quite surprising, isn't it? And in some ways, I think it's almost a positive thing. But I mean, that's obviously my.
Yeah, I mean, I saw it as a positive thing. I thought it was interesting. I think the strength of feeling against that war at home was so much. And I say my own mum marched in the thing. But I think the strength of feeling was so great that of course we were writing letters home, getting letters from home back in those days when you wrote letters. And, you know, obviously we were seeing the news on the TV. So I guess they were just worried that we all perhaps thought that we shouldn't be there and that, you know, this wasn't the right thing to be doing. None of us cared. You know, this was our job and this is what we...
It's about undermining morale, isn't it, fundamentally,
yeah,
I guess.
Yeah. And I don't think there was any morale issues at all. I mean, everyone was really keen to go. You know, this is our one chance. You know, we spent years talking to the guys in the Falklands, you know, and this was going to be our war, you know, and we didn't want to miss it. There's no way we were going to sort of worry about it, you know, so well. And then that contrasts massively with arguably one of the weirdest things that happened. I think it was weird. So the night before, so this must have been on the 18th. I guess they knew that we were getting ready to go within the next couple of days, and so we were at Ali Al Salem Air Base in Kuwait, big massive air base, heavily damaged actually during the first Gulf War because when Saddam had occupied that air base, and so a lot of the aircraft hangars have still got the big holes in the roof where the bunker busters had gone in and blown them up. So anyway, we were there, arguably living the life of Riley because we were with the SEALs, you don't rough it, and you know there was a big PX there, and it was all the food was excellent and all the rest of it. And we were invited to go to a hangar, big massive aircraft hangar, one end of which was the biggest Stars and Stripes you've ever seen. It was absolutely enormous, and onto this Stars and Stripes was projected what can only be described as an American. What's the word? I can't think of the word. It was basically showing America and how great America was and how great their armed forces. Propaganda is the word I couldn't think of.
Okay.
You know, arguably a big American propaganda film. You know, and it was showing, you know, aircraft and men with massive chins and big muscles and, you know, all this sort of stuff. And it was just God bless America. And we were surrounded in the hangar with various different aircraft and vehicles and, you know, all nice and shiny. It was a real display of American strength and power, you know. And then as we looked round, there were these grown-ass men crying, you know, and standing with their hand on their chest, you know, like Americans do when they sing the national anthem. And my lads were just looking at me and I'm sort of shrugging my shoulders. It was just bizarre. And, you know, there was these grown men crying their eyes out. And I don't know, it had the opposite effect. It was obviously, you know, a way of gearing them up and getting them ready for what was to come. But to us, it was just like, oh my God, can we please be from this? It was just bizarre. Very, very bizarre. But, you know, very American. And that's, you know, if it gets them through the day, then fantastic. It was all very God bless America and, you know, God is great and so is America and all that sort of stuff. And I think we went to bed bemused by the whole thing that night. And then I think the next day, so this must have been the 19th of March, I believe, the air raid sirens started to go off. And I think this is when Saddam started chucking a few Scud missiles about the place. And of course, the big fear was that, you know, they'd have chemical weapons inside them. And, you know, we took that very, very seriously. And so much so that I think before we sailed, in fact, so this must have been December. So I think this was, I said we must have started preparing, and we did. we were offered anthrax injections, and it was an option. You didn't have to have them, and I chose to have these anthrax. I think it was 3 or 4, maybe. I chose to have them purely from a psychological point of view. I had no idea what they were pumping into my body, but I thought that when the scuds start to fly, psychologically, I'd be thinking to myself, do you know what? I'm protected if this is anthrax.
Yeah.
If I wasn't, maybe I'd be a little bit more, Jesus, is this got anthrax in it? So that's why I agreed to have them. So I do remember thinking as those scuds started to fly, I've had my injections, you can't get me. But of course, what it meant was that we then had to put on our NBC suits. And I never thought I'd go to war in an NBC suit. It's something we never really take very seriously, if I'm honest. Because the Americans were putting theirs on, we couldn't not put ours on. And they said that, they said it's up to you if you put them on or not, but I said, well, no, we're going to put them on. You guys are, we are. So we stood there in our NBC suits. The bigger lads like me didn't have desert-coloured ones. It was that time when we couldn't get the kit to us, so I had a green one, so I didn't stand out at all. But he green NBC suit, so our respirators were to hand. These scuds were flying around, and we all sort of mustered in the hangar where all the kit was. And I want to say we spent the day in there, just dressed like this. And then the word came that we were going to go that night. This was it. We're going in. And again, they kept their NBC suits on. I was like, oh my God, I didn't really want to be running around wearing these things. They're horrendous. So I don't think at any point we put our respirators on, thank God. But
there's something particularly frightening, is there, about biological warfare, do you think?
Oh, yeah. I've always believed, and I'm sure people will shoot me down for this, but I've always believed that it's almost unsurvivable. And that all the training we do is some sort of, morale issue to make you feel like you might survive it. But you make one small mistake with some of this stuff that they talk about, and it's a hideous death. I'm sure it does protect us, but I wouldn't be fighting in that sort of stuff. It must be terrifying, absolutely terrifying. There was a little bit of that at the back of our heads. But nobody had said there were chemicals. All those scuds were flying, and I'm wondering now. I don't know if anyone said there aren't chemicals. I don't know if we were told that specifically, but I remember not being told there were. If that makes sense. So all right, and the fact that we hadn't put our respirators on at any point also meant that maybe it isn't as bad as all that. And then again, I remember suiting up. And it's always the case. It's always lads are laughing and joking, and there's a serious element, obviously, to what we're about to do, but we're all sort of laughing and joking, taking the piss out of each other, moaning because we're wearing NBC suits and body armour and all the other, the ammunition and all the rest of it. And interestingly enough, the helicopters that we've been working with, they were huge American helicopters. I think they're called NH-53s. And it's not a Chinook or anything like that. It's just this massive helicopter that the US Marine Corps have got. But they're really slow and really cumbersome. And bizarrely, they're a little bit rubbish at carrying weight. So although there was 8 of us and probably the same amount of SEALs, so 16, maybe 17 of us on the back of this aircraft, it was so underpowered that we couldn't take our Bergens with us. So all we had, the SEALs don't stay out for the night. They don't do camping. Absolutely not. So it wasn't an issue for them. But obviously we were camping and we didn't know how long we were going to be there. So all we had was a day sack. And in that day sack was maybe a warm top, I can't remember. A lot of NBC stuff, so our boots, gloves, everything else that we needed in case, and food and water, and that was it. That's all we had on us. And whatever ammunition we couldn't carry about our person was also in our day sack. So all we had was a day sack each. So we're loading up, we're getting ready. We probably canned out, and again, I remember pictures of guys in the Falklands about to land on the beach there, and they're all putting the can cream on, so I'm sure we must have done. And I don't remember exactly the process, but we then made our way out to the helicopter, which was turning and burning. There was a line of them, I think 3 or 4 of them on the tarmac. And this is something we've been doing every day in rehearsal. So at this point, it didn't really feel any different to anything we've been doing at any other point up to now, other than we were wearing these bloody NBC suits. So we got out to the helicopters. We boarded the helicopters in reverse order. So I would have been the fourth man out. I think I was the fourth man out of the helicopter. So I was the seventh man in, eighth man in, something like that. No, sixth man in. Anyway, so we're all sat down one side of the helicopter. We were down the starboard side. All the SEALs were sat down the port side of the helicopter. And, I just remember looking around at everybody. Everyone was just in their own little world, chatting to each other. It was just another exercise, really. It didn't feel any different. But then what did feel different is as we took off, they did a run-in takeoff. So they sort of went down the runway like an aeroplane would and lifted off that way. And as we looked out the window of the helicopter, all you could see all the way along the runway was all the people that run the base, all the sort of reps, for want of a better word. They were all lining the runway and they were all cheering. The US flags were out flying. They were all saluting us as we went up. Very American, and it was actually quite nice. Actually, I enjoyed that because we wouldn't have got anything like that if it was Brits. They'd have all been in the naffy having a good time or whatever. So that was quite nice actually to see all that. And off we went into the dark, and there was a rolling mat in the helicopter, so we could kind of see where we were. And Al Salem is kind of on the east coast of Kuwait, and I think we flew north up Kuwait. And there's a big island between Kuwait and Iraq called Bubiyan Island, and on that island, I know there was a lot of American artillery which were going to support us. And I remember flying up, and I don't think we went straight there. I think we did a bit of a circle around possibly Bubiyan Island. I can't remember. But one of the things I remember seeing, I looked out the other window on my side of the helicopter, and I saw cruise missiles. And I don't mean right next to the helicopter, but you could see these things flying up, heading up into Iraq. And that's when it dawned on me that, oh my God, we are a very small cog in something massive. And I was aware that, you had cruise missiles you had helicopters, cruise missiles, fighter jets, bombers, God knows what else, all on a big stack, I suppose, all flying up into Iraq to do what they needed to do that night. So you were aware of that, you were part of something pretty big actually. And I then started thinking about home a little bit, and I looked at my watch. It was 10 o'clock, I think. And at 10, I think the time difference, it meant it was 7 o'clock at home. And I remember thinking, oh my God, my kids are getting put to bed right now. This is what they're doing right now. And they've got absolutely no idea, that I'm sat in a helicopter just about to go and do whatever we were going to do. And it just made me think of that film, We Were Soldiers, when Mel Gibson and all them lads are fighting for their lives in the jungle, and then it goes back to home and you can see what their families are doing at home. I just thought about that. So that was a little bit sobering, I suppose. And then I don't remember how long after, but there was this sort of 10-minute thing that came down. 10 minutes, we're going to be landing in 10 minutes. So everybody, starts concentrating on what they're going to do, sort of put the game face on, make sure everything's where we need it, where we know it is, but we still check anyway. And then I wasn't aware of this, but you could smell cordite, the really strong smell of cordite. And what that was the waist gunner of the helicopter firing us in as we came in. He had a big one of these chain guns, with 6 barrels that spin around really fast. So he was obviously laying down some suppressive fire using that as we came in. I didn't hear it, but I remember smelling it. And then we landed. We touched down. The ramp went down. We've all stood up by now, ready to go. And the guys in front of me, the third. So I was number 5 at the door, not number 4, number 5. And I was aware that as the 4 Marines in front of me started running out the back of the helicopter, because we were supposed to get off first to form this defensive L shape, the SEALs would come out afterwards. And the first 4 lads off the ramp just fell. As soon as they stepped off the ramp, they went down straight away. And I was thinking, shit, we're under fire. You can't hear this stuff, obviously, inside a helicopter. But of course, you've got to keep going. You can't just stop. So you have to keep going. And when I got to the end of the ramp, I realised that we weren't getting shot at. The ramp had gone down into a barbed wire entanglement, and they were just going straight into the barbed wire, and that's what was making them fall over, obviously. So I think I stepped over one of them and managed to get myself over the top of the barbed wire, which I think everyone else did. We managed to get these fellas out the barbed wire. The SEALs came out behind us, I think they pushed off to the right somewhere. And then we wait for the helicopter to go. And you can imagine all the dust and the dirt and everything that all swirling around us. And as the helicopter went, and almost as soon as it went, probably 2 or 3 feet in front of me, a head popped itself up out of the trench that was right in front of us, which was a bit surprising. I remember there was a fire going off on the left-hand side, and I later found out that this helicopter had blasted up a vehicle which had caught fire. That's why it was on. That's why it was burning. Anyway, so this head popped up, had a quick look, and then popped down. I was like, "Oh my god, there's a trench right in front of us." So I took one of my grenades out, and I don't know if you know, on a grenade there's a thing called a transit clip, and it's quite a good idea. It looks a little bit like a Jubilee clip. And it's what it is. It hooks round. So I don't know if you know how a grenade works. You pull the pin, then there's a lever. The pin holds the lever down. When the pin's free, the lever can spring off. As the lever springs off, that sets the fuse going inside the grenade, and you get between 3 and 5 seconds before it goes bang.
Yep.
Now, what can happen while you're carrying it around in your pooches as you're running around? It's possible that the pin could come out with obvious disastrous. I think that's a very unlikely thing. It's not like Hollywood where you can pull them out with your teeth. These things are really difficult to pull out. I mean, they really are, for a very good reason. But nonetheless, it's an extra safety thing. So when you throw a grenade, you ping off this clip, you pull the pin, and you chuck the grenade, and then boom, off it goes. So there I am. I've got my grenade out. I've pinged off the Jubilee or this transit clip, and I've posted a grenade in this trench in front of me because I now know it's full of Iraqis. And I've sort of ducked down, and I'm sort of looking and waiting, 3, 4, 5, no, nothing. There's no bang. And this guy stuck his head up again. My grenade hadn't gone off. And at the risk of sounding like Prince Harry, I shot this guy in the face, I think. And then the rest of them stood up and surrendered. And I didn't really give it any more thought. We pulled these guys out. They were captured, but I think we passed them back to somebody else, or we tied them up, or something. I can't remember, because of course we had to push on with the rest of the site. So we fanned out into our little L shape, and we had things. It's called glint tape, because the air cover that we had were 2 A-10 aircraft. You had a little bit of a reputation for shooting British soldiers, as they did in the first Gulf War, and a thing called an AC-130, which is a Hercules aircraft that's got a 105mm cannon in it, a massive chain gun, and all sorts of 40mm grenade launch. It's phenomenal. This aircraft is absolutely phenomenal. The firepower it can bring down. So they were above us, and I remember speaking to the A-10 pilots actually before we deployed. And they were telling us that they have no means of identifying us on the ground. The only way they can see us is if they turn on their Maverick missiles. The Maverick missiles have got a camera in the front,
right?
And that's how they see you. And it's a little bit disconcerting knowing that this pilot is looking at you through his missile, and all he's got to do is press that little button, and you're getting a little taste of that missile. And so what they came up with is a thing called an IR buzzsaw. 21st century technology. It's a piece of green string about 6 feet long, with a Siloon chem stick, an IR chem stick on the end, which is invisible to the naked eye. But if you swing this 6-foot bit of rope over your head like a lasso, what it looks like to the A-10 pilot looking at you through his missile system is a cartwheel of light. That's what he can see, and that's how you identify yourself. And another way is this glint tape. So again, it's IR, but it's reflective at night time.
Yeah.
So covered in this stuff. And so when we formed into this L shape, I looked through my night vision and I noticed what looked like a huge gas cylinder or something like that in the doorway of this building. Now, I don't know what that is. That can be an IED. I don't know. And so I got one of my young Marines, a bloke called Marine Cameron Burrs, his name was. He's a New Zealander. And he had a 94mm rocket, it's a disposable anti-tank rocket, and they're really cumbersome to carry. They're a pain in the ass. But I said to him, right, Cam, I want you to engage whatever it is in the doorway. And I remember him looking at me going, what, really? And I went, yes, mate, this isn't an exercise. You can really shoot that thing. And he was very excited. So I remember he extended the weapon. I think he maybe it's got 5 spotter rounds, so you can get your point of aim. I think he maybe fired 1 or 2 of those, and then boom, he let off this massive anti-tank rocket into this doorway. It was a big explosion. I don't know what that thing was, but it was gone anyway. And as that was happening, I noticed there was a lot of explosions on this big concrete building that we were now facing. So I'm now thinking it's these aircraft above us. They've seen us shooting this doorway, and they've now gone, brilliant, we'll have a go at this as well. So we're all now rolling on our backs, so that we, like this with the IR buzzsaw, making sure that our glint tape is very obvious, so that we're not on receiving end of whatever's coming out of this aircraft. And as I rolled onto my right side to do that, I looked over to my left, and it was the SEALs, and they were all lined up on the top of the berm going around this this target. And they had their 40mm grenades, which are underneath their rifles. You'd have seen them in the movies. It's like an M16 with what looks like a shotgun underneath it. Mm-hmm. So that's a 40mm grenade launcher. And they were stood there firing these things from the hip against this bloody building that had 6 foot thick concrete walls. I don't know what they were doing, but they were just dropping explosives onto this thing. And so we all breathed a sigh of relief. It's just them being cowboys. It's not us getting shot at by these aircraft. So I think we cleared that building quite quickly. And then the SEALs came over. They checked that there was no explosives on the pipeline. They did what they needed to do, and then I think we then spent the next 2 hours clearing the trenches. There were a lot of trenches there. And when I say clearing them, we were dropping grenades in first, making sure there was nothing in there that could bite us really. Just as we finished doing that, I think we cleared the last trench, and none of them were full of men. That wasn't like a killing spree or anything. They just weren't in the trenches, but obviously you don't know that until you clear them. And I think just as we were clearing the last trench, the echo had just died down from the last grenade when the helicopters came back, and this was the company now arriving. I think it was a couple of hours maybe after we landed. So they came back. They dropped all the guys off, and the SEALs got onto those helicopters and disappeared. And so we were left there now with our own company. So I managed to, and again, this is all rehearsed. So I knew how they were getting off the helicopters, and we got everybody positioned exactly where I needed them to be positioned with, the Milan firing posts, the anti-tank missiles, the .5 machine guns. Everything was sighted exactly where I wanted them to be off this naval chart. And then that was it. And we started observing the military, that big military installation off to the east. And so we were on alert all night, obviously expecting at any moment to get a counterattack from that direction. And there was a lot of gunfire around. There's a lot. You could hear heavy bombing in the distance. You could see it rumbling around on the horizon. It's quite a surreal thing, actually. And then somebody said to me that they could see somebody. So on the Milan missile system, there's a thermal sight. It's very good, actually. It's called a Myra. Very, very good sight. And they could see somebody moving about out to our front. Now I'm thinking, okay, well, this guy could be a sniper. He could be somebody who's getting in position to call in artillery or anything like that on top of us. So, we need to do something about this. So I got onto my .5 gunners, and they had a thing on the top of their guns called a maxi kite. Now, maxi kite is a first generation night vision. They use it in the Falklands, and it's just pants. It's not very good at all. It's really, really awful. If you set it up on a bright lit street, you might see something through it. But on a dark night in Iraq, they couldn't see anything through this bloody thing. So the gunners couldn't see this because it was a rubbish sight. And I thought, okay, we need to get rid of this guy. So my plan was quite simple. And I got back on the radio to the guys on the Milan and said, right, lads, I want you to engage that target with one of your Milan missiles, which cost £13,000, by the way, and are designed to blow up tanks. I want you to engage that target with a missile. Gunners, where that missile lands, rapid fire. So it was like a big watch my tracer, which is a target indication method. You fire a tracer at a target. Everyone can see where that tracer's landing, and you would say, watch my tracer. So it's like a big watch my tracer, only with a £13,000 anti-tank missile. So that's exactly what they did. So they fired this missile, off it went, boom, and then the guns opened up with some quite heavy sustained fire onto this target, so this man. And this went on all night. There was a little bit of this going on all night. And then finally in the morning, just at dawn, I think it was, I was looking through my binoculars in the general direction, and I saw what looked like somebody flopping about all over the place. And again, I thought that can't be that same bloke. So we sent out a fighting patrol to go and investigate. And we had a quad bike, so they went out with the quad bike and the medic on this fighting patrol, and they sort of came back a few minutes later, or however long it was, with this Iraqi draped over the quad bike. And they said that when they found him, one of his legs was missing, and the other one was just being held on by a thread, really, just by a couple of bits of sinew. And he was white as a sheet, as you can imagine. And he kept on repeating over and over again, "I love Tony Blair. I love Tony Blair," over and over again. And it turned out he was a young Iraqi officer, spoke pretty good English. And everybody shook his hand because he'd spent the night with us shooting at him. Now, I was a bit disappointed that we didn't hit him. Arguably we should have hit him, but he was pretty messed up. And we found out later one of the lads' wives or girlfriends was a medic somewhere, and she remembered him coming back, and he survived. He obviously lost both legs, but he did survive, so that was quite nice. So we had a lot of admiration for this fella. He was the toughest guy we've ever met in our lives. He put up with an awful lot of high explosive and tracer rounds that night, and survived the whole ordeal. And then I think the next day, I don't think we had to readjust anything. I think everything was exactly where it needed to be. I remember we called a few airstrikes in on that base. We'd see people moving about, so we called airstrikes in on them. And there was one occasion when I think there was six people moving about. So we called naval gunfire support, which was, I think we had two British ships and an Australian ship just sailing off the coast. And this was the fear, because that naval gunfire support has a very flat trajectory. So they were very worried about some of the rounds skipping into Iran. So artillery was our preferred option, but for some reason we only had the NGS at that time. Anyway, so these six guys were moving about. We called in the naval gunfire support, and they gave the command. I can't remember the time, but it was something like shot 1-4 or something like that. What that means is the shots have been fired, and it's going to take 14 seconds before they hit the ground. I'll say shot 1-4. It may have been longer, it may have been shot, I can't remember, but shot 1-4. And just as that was given over the radio, we saw a white flag being raised by these six individuals. But of course, there's 6 rounds in the air, and there's nothing we can do to stop that. And so, of course, these poor fellas were on the receiving end of that. Mm-hmm. And then I think the next day, we just spent the rest of the time on clearance patrols. You know, we would go off towards that base, make sure there was nothing around there. We went all around that base. We looked around, and there was nobody there. They'd either been killed or they'd all run away. But what we did find was a hell of a lot of artillery ammunition. And they could have done us some serious damage with that stuff, but they chose not to use it. But there was rooms absolutely rammed to the ceiling full of this stuff. And I think when the insurgency eventually started, not long after all this happened, I'm almost certain that a lot of those artillery rounds would have found their way into roadside bombs. And I suppose the argument's there that maybe we should have dealt with that and blown it all up in sight, but we didn't know this was coming, so it wasn't. But I'm pretty sure a lot of that must have been used subsequently. And then we found another surreal thing. We found a dead Iraqi who was half, I think his trousers were sort of, like jogging bottoms or something. I think he had a military shirt on. And the way he was facing it looked like he was running from where we'd actually attacked. And the reason it was weird was because he had a hole through his head, which literally, it looked like something out of the Terminator. It looked like something sort of side plate sized had just gone through his head, and it hadn't exploded. His head hadn't exploded. His head was perfect, except for this hole that ran straight through it. And it was just really weird. It just, I don't know. It wasn't even gross. It was just interesting. I can't really explain that. But it was very, very strange to see, because you would have thought something hit your head like that. And it must have been one of these aircraft. I think they'd seen him running, and one of the aircraft had engaged him, and it was such a fast round that it had literally just gone straight through him. It hadn't even registered that it had gone through his head and exploded. It had just gone through. So that was weird. So we buried him. Or covered him over rather than buried him. And I remember I found a rock. I took a GPS location of where he was, and just put on the top 1 times Iraqi. And then when I got back to where we patrolled from, just reported the fact that, there's a guy out there, he's dead, And speaking of dead Iraqis, we killed 2 during the assault. So I think one of the SEALs had killed one of the others. And we put the bodies into a trench and sort of loosely covered them over because we didn't have time to do anything else really. And their bodies had been searched for any documents, and that's not a war crime. That's a standard procedure. If they've got any documents on there that we need to know about. And I remember somebody, I can't remember if it was the sergeant major or maybe the company clerk or somebody like that. I just happened to be walking past while he was sorting out these effects. And he said, "Oh, you probably don't want to see this." And he showed me a photograph. Or I looked down and there was a photograph of a lady and 2 children, which had obviously been taken off one of these bodies. And he's right, I didn't want to see that. I didn't know which body it'd come off, but potentially, 50-50 chance it was off the one that I'd killed. So that was quite nasty. I didn't really like that. And then later on that day, somebody came to me and said, "Look, the dogs are starting to dig up the bodies and eat them."
Oh my God!
Which isn't very, yeah, you can imagine. So I sort of said, "Well, okay, we're going to have to bury these bodies." And so I went and got hold of the guys and said, "Listen, lads, I've got this really honking task that we need to do, but we've got to do it. It needs to be done properly." So we buried the bodies a little bit better, and again recorded where they were because they've got families. We know one of them for sure had, and that was that. We also discovered throughout the first day that one of the guys that we captured, in fact, he was in the trench that I had initially sort of come out in front of. One of them was a very senior officer. I think it was a brigadier, maybe slightly higher. And they were all in civilian clothes. And what we think had happened was the truck that had been set on fire by the helicopter when it shot it. I think he had come out in that truck and he had a large bag of money. We found a huge sports bag full of money, absolutely rammed with cash. And we think what they were doing was that these senior officers were trying to pay off these young soldiers to stay and fight. And he happily got caught with his pants down, literally. We landed just as he was there. They must have known that we were coming, ultimately. And so what I did, I got the big bag of cash, and I'd spend the next few days going around to all the lads and saying, "Right, yeah, you've done a pretty good job today. Here's $1,000, here's 10,000, whatever it was, Iraqi dinars or whatever." And this money was absolutely worthless. It was completely worthless. But it was a nice little souvenir. I think I bought 2 notes home. I think that was it, because what am I going to do with a big wad of Iraqi cash? Nothing. So it was just quite funny that, and then we found a motorbike, which I managed to get going as well. And I'd drive around this position, paying the lads off, which was kept us all amused. And then ultimately, and again, I can't remember which day it was, day 6, I want to say, and there was something going on, and I got drafted. I got posted. There was me, the sergeant major, another one of the sergeants, and quite a few other people actually were the drafting machine, and the Royal Marines didn't stop because there was a war on. And so we got sent away from the front line. And I think day 6 we ended up back on board HMS Ocean, very, very dejected that we'd actually been sent away. And not only it was not only the situation that we were in, that was my job, but also I'd invested a lot of my time in these lads that I was with. I'd sort of trained them. I'd got them to a really, really high standard. I'd taken them into the Al-Faw. They were all still alive. They were all doing their jobs amazingly well. And I felt like they were my children, and then I was abandoning them at the school play. They'd rehearsed all this time for their school play. They wanted to watch them do it. And I'm sorry, kids, the dad's come. I've got to go. And that's really, really how it felt. It was awful, actually. I didn't like that at all. So I ended up back at home, dropped my kit off in my office, went home, and then I think it was the next day. I got a call. Where are you? I'm at home. What are you doing there? You drafted me. You're supposed to be in Cyprus. So I got on the plane the next day, and I was back in Cyprus 3 or 4 days later, after being drafted from the Al-Faw Peninsula, and I was now the CQMS of X-ray company 4-5 Commando. We'd spent most of the war in Cyprus, and they were supporting the special forces. That task had been finished. The war was practically over by now anyway. think it was over. So we, again, probably spent a week in Cyprus and then ended up flying back to Iraq, and I ended up 50k from where I'd originally left. The war was now over. I was the CQMS, and but there was still stuff to do. Of course, there was a lot to do. The brigade by this time had reorged at a place called Qasr, which is a big naval base, and I managed to hook up with the lads that I'd left. Heard their stories, because there was another big attack that they had to do on a place called Ali Al Qasib, I think it was, and they had quite a sporty time there, actually. And again, I was gutted, but so pleased that they'd all made it through that. None of them had been hurt. I think a few of the lads in the company had been wounded. Actually, there was a blue-on-blue artillery incident where no one was killed, thankfully, but a couple of lads were wounded in that. But apart from that, the company was pretty unscathed, actually. And so that was really. There was a lot of foot patrols going on at that time. I used to go out on those as much as possible. There was a lot of hearts and minds. All the Iraqis were pleased to see us at this time. So there were the diehards, the Saddam faithful who were out there, who were sort of ambushing lads. There was still stuff to do. So there was a little bit going on, but it was quite benign. And then eventually, I can't remember how long it was from when we left. So I'm going to say it must have been at least 5 months. I was one of the last ones home because I was the CQMS. I was having to bring all the stores home, all the weapons and everything like that. So I came home on a C-17 with all my stores and got back to the UK. Made sure the stores got where they needed to be, and then I think we went on leave straight from there. So that was the war.
So, Andy, I would like to fast forward to your current role, which rather unusually involves guarding the crown jewels. So just tell me a little bit about that. But also, in your time there, things have changed a little bit in your life, and then we'll come on to that in a sec. But what is your current role?
So I am a yeoman warder of His Majesty's Royal Palace and Fortress, the Tower of London, and a yeoman of the Guardian Extraordinary. But most people know us as Beefeaters. So that's our full title. Yeoman warder for short, or Beefeater. Beefeater is a derogatory nickname, which we don't really, no one really knows for sure what the source of that nickname is, but we're quite happy that people call us Beefeaters. So is that a French thing? Because don't the French use it as an insult to say that I'm not going to try the French because I can't, but that we all eat beef in this country. Well, this is one of the misconceptions. I think there's an awful lot of that's one I've heard. I've heard that it comes from the French word buffetier, which means to serve food, like buffet. But I spoke to French people. There's no such word, and also we're still members of the Sovereign's bodyguard, and so we're not there to serve his food. He's got waiters for that. We were the food tasters, apparently, which again is nonsense, because if someone in the room had just tried to poison the king just killed his bodyguard, and that person is still in the room that tried to kill him. So that makes no sense.
Not ideal.
Yeah, so there's all sorts of nonsense that you'll find online, but we don't really know for sure. We think we were paid at some point with a ration of meat, which would have been a good thing, because people back in those days wouldn't have had access to meat. They'd have only eaten rats or pigeons. So we think it's got something to do with that, but we're not entirely sure. So
if anybody listening to this podcast has got any theories,
there's plenty.
Please let us know. That would be great to hear them. So, in your current role, you're there for a couple of years, and then what happens?
So I joined the Tower on Prince George's birthday, so 2013. When I say birthday, the day he was born, 2013. So and then I think in 2016, March the 6th, 2016, I was March the 7th. In fact, today, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. So there'd been a few things happening. I was sort of almost comedically tripping over things quite regularly, much to my kids' amusement. Then I had a really severe pain in my right eye, really, really bad pain. I went to an optician's to find out why, and they said, well, there's nothing wrong with your eye. But they referred me to Moorfields Hospital in London, which is the sort of country's leading eye hospital, who said the same thing. There's absolutely nothing wrong with your eye. And yet it was incredibly painful. And then during my tours at work, I'd be pointing things out with my left hand, and my hand straightens. But when I was pointing things out with my right hand, it doesn't straighten. And so I was sort of looking at my hand and going, well, why is that the case? Anyway, so luckily at the time, the doctor at the tower, sadly, who died a couple of years ago, but he very well connected in London. There wasn't a consultant or a disease that he didn't know a consultant for. So I was sent to the National Centre for Neurology in Queen Square in London, and it took over a year, in fact, to diagnose it. And it was there's a lot of things it could be with similar symptoms, motor neuron disease being one. They're very similar in the way they present themselves. So it was quite a nervous sign. There was clearly something wrong, but I think they're reluctant to give you a diagnosis until the final test, which was they drew some spinal fluid out of my back, which is quite possibly the most horrendous thing I've ever had in my life. It was absolutely honking. But that's the final test. And so, yeah, I was called in and they said, yep, you've got multiple sclerosis. And my initial reaction was, well, thank God for that. Because there's so many things it could have been that are so much worse, I think. And I didn't really know what multiple sclerosis is. I absolutely know I've heard of it, of course, and I think most people have heard of it, but don't really know what it is. So I sort of went, oh, okay, that's okay. And I felt obviously quite healthy, other than my eye had stopped hurting, but my hand still didn't straighten. I'm still tripping over things, but that was fine. If that's the worst it could be, then I could live with that. So I was immediately handed a pack by the consultant from the MS Trust. And so that started my relationship with the MS Trust, because within 20 seconds of being told I had MS, I was given this pack which kind of explained it, and it takes a long time to sort of sink in really and really understand what it is that you're facing. And I've got what's called secondary progressive MS, which isn't the worst one to have, but it's certainly not the best one. It's kind of the middle one. And I think the progressive is the key word. And what I perhaps didn't understand right at the beginning was, I felt okay at that diagnosis, but I'm on a slide, and I'm never getting off that slide. And the only thing that changes in my life, MS-wise, is how steep that slide is. So sometimes it's really steep, and the symptoms progressively get worse very quickly. And then maybe the slide will sort of, level out a little bit, and the symptoms stay the same, but very slowly get worse. But I'm always on that slide. I'll never get off that slide. And so 7 years later, almost exactly, one of the first things I did when I was first diagnosed, I decided to climb Mont Blanc.
As you do, of course.
Okay. I'm sort of going to, and it was selfish really. I wanted to show to myself really that I could still do that. And, MS wasn't going to stop me doing stuff. And that's a hard mountain to climb anyway, but when you've got a neurological condition that affects your limbs, it was quite cheeky, to say the least. But we raised £60,000.
Oh, well done.
So thank you. That was 5 years ago. Now, sadly, I struggle to climb stairs. I find getting upstairs very, very difficult. And so there's an example of the progression. I as much as I'd love to climb a mountain now, I couldn't do it. It's I wouldn't say it's an impossibility, but it's gusting towards an impossibility to climb a mountain, and it would be unsafe as well. So I'm asked a lot if I would climb another one. I'd do it in a heartbeat if I could find a way to do it safely. But of course, it's not just about me; it's about other people. Sort of hanging on to me. The last mountain I went up actually was Ben Nevis a few years ago, and it was a charity thing. And I was practically carried off the mountain. I couldn't use my legs, and no one actually physically carried me. I wouldn't let them, but I certainly needed their support to get off that mountain. I was the last person off the mountain that day. It was well past dark, and I was pretty exhausted. But so it was a good one. It was a decent mountain to climb. That was the last one. It's a progressive illness. It's a little bit shit, if I'm honest. But my glass is half full. I try not to look at the things I can't do. Okay, I can't climb a mountain, but I can still go to the gym every day. I can still do stuff in the gym. I can't go for a run, but I can still sit on a bike for half an hour. It's not about what I can't do. It's the things that I can do that are important to me, and that's what I sort of concentrate on. and just adapt the stuff I do. I can't do press. I can't put both legs on the floor to do press ups. So I put my weak leg, which is my right side, I put that over my left leg. So I do it one-legged. That makes sense. So I support myself one leg. So I can still do press ups. I just have to adapt how I do them. And that's really what it's all about.
So are we talking a bit of cheerfulness in adversity here?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, because I'm not going to lie and say that there aren't times, when I'm on my own and I just think, why me? Why have I got this? This is really bad. But I sort of get a grip of myself and I think, well, do you know what? I can't change it. It's not going away anywhere. So there's no point moaning about it. There's no point being miserable about it. I've just got to sort of get on with it. I don't really see the point in being miserable about it because that's just going to bring you down. It doesn't do you any good at all. So yeah, absolutely cheerfulness in the face of adversity.
So you said you had problems with walking, and there's a video, isn't there, that I think the Royal Marines Association put together. And that was quite interesting. And we'll put this in the link in the description below so people can find it easily. But you've got this electronic device like a tag. That's my description of it. Tell us about that.
Firstly, it's funny you say it's a tag because when in the summer when I'm wearing shorts, so I've got tattoos, I wear a baseball cap, and I've got what literally does look like a tag, and I do see old women sort of moving away from me, or certainly looking at me with trepidation. So when it started getting a bit rubbish, I was under the care of the physio in the National Centre for Neurology, and they're physios specifically for people with MS. They sort of understand it. Anyway, I had this device called an FES, a functioning electronic stimulator, and it's an NHS special. There's nothing wrong with it at all, but it's a couple of pads, almost like one of these TENS machines, and you put the pads on a certain part of the muscle of my leg. Because one of the things I get in my right leg is a thing called foot drop. So when you walk, you without any conscious thought, your heel hits the ground first, and then you roll onto the balls of your feet and so on. But in MS, I can't lift my foot up. It doesn't lift up. So if you like, it's just an appendage hanging off the bottom of my leg. And so it drags on the floor, which is one of the things that causes you to trip. So this little device sits on the muscles and it stimulates the muscles to contract, which then lifts my foot up, which means that you can walk slightly more normally. There's a little trigger, I suppose, in the heel of the shoe that then goes up to these pads, and then there's another load of wires that go up to a little box that you wear in your pocket or something. And to be honest, you look like a bit of a suicide bomber with all this bloody wiring going all around your leg. And again, in the summer, it was a bit of, people are looking at me like, what the hell's that? And plus, it took ages to put on in the morning. You only had to get the pad slightly wrong, and it would just mess it up, and your foot would go off in all different angles. So anyway, I spoke to the physio about that, and they said, well, there is this thing. It's called a cuff made by a company called Otterbock, and they do a lot of prosthetics stuff, a lot of prosthetic work for people with missing limbs and all the rest of it. And so they're pretty good. Anyway, there's this device that you just put on. It's just a cuff. I know that's no good for your listeners, but there it is.
Oh, it's quite a chunky piece of kit, isn't it?
It's very chunky. So yeah. But the good thing about it is I can just put it on my leg, and it's on there. Turn it on, and off I go. And then I can take it off. The downside is I can't, not that I do at my age, but I can't wear tight trousers because there has to be enough room in the trouser in order to go over the top of the cuff. But anyway, she was telling me about this cuff, and it cost £5,000. So she said, it probably isn't suitable for you. And I said, well, let me speak to the Royal Marines charity and see what they say. So I did speak to them, and by the end of that week, I think they paid for this cuff. So I wear it, and it's a brilliant bit of kit. It really is. I mean, it's without it, I can't walk, and it's as simple as that. The one I've got can also be, because, and this has happened to me now, but they thought about it before this, is that the foot drop that I explained there is kind of from my knee downwards. That's how that part of my leg was affected. But now it's up to my hip. So from my hip downwards, I struggle to lift my leg. So now I need another one of these cuffs on the back of my leg at the top, around my hamstring, and then that would then stimulate the muscles around my hip to lift, and then it fire a message to this other one I wear on my lower leg to then lift my foot up. And there's I'm not sure that, I wouldn't be able to sit down with that one, so I don't really know how that's going to work. But there are other things that you can, that this Otterbot made. There's a leg brace, there's all sorts of different ways that they can do it. So I'm going to be looking into some of that stuff soon, because as it progresses, my right leg now is just hanging off my hip. I can barely use my right leg.
Gosh. First of all, it's amazing what they can do with technology. Obviously, well done to the Royal Marines charity for supporting you, of course.
Yeah.
I think that is amazing. But I think it must be, what's going through my head, and I'm sure people must have said this to you, you've obviously had, a military career in the Royal Marines. You've gone on to do other things. But, let's just say quite a lot of physical exertion involved in those activities. Kind of how do you reconcile that with, relying on an electronic device to enable you to walk, or does it not even occur to you?
No, it does. I'm not. That's not lost to me at all. And I think that's probably the hardest thing for me is the the active life that I've had. And I look at people just walking now and I think, I wish I could just walk.
Wow.
And like I said to you before, I do have those moments, but I can't. So there's no point, worrying about it. But I think the best answer to your question is one of the guys that climbs Mont Blanc with me has also got MS, and he had it before I left the court. I think he was still in, actually. I can't remember. But he was still in, and he sort of said, I've got MS. And again, nobody really knew. I didn't know what it was, really. We just used to take the piss out of him a little bit, you've been this spastic, and all this. And he's got the sort of good one, not good one, but the best one to have, the one that's doesn't affect him maybe quite the same as mine affects me. He's got what's called relapse and remitting. I'm not saying that's good at all. It's not a good one, but slightly more manageable. I think there's more drugs that can deal with that. Anyway, and I had my top table when I left the Marines on board HMS Victory, and I'd phoned him up and said, do you want us to get a wheelchair ramp up for you? And he's not in a wheelchair, he does't need one, but it was just his banter.
Yeah.
So imagine my surprise when I had to phone him up a few years later and say, all right, mate, about your MS, I've got that as well, And he said, well, isn't karma a bitch? But he said the most profound thing to me, and it's something that stuck with me. It's what I tell myself. I literally tell myself this when I'm feeling a bit sorry for myself. He said that we got this, towards the end of our 40s, right towards the end of my 40s in my case. But we've had the life that we've had. We've done all those things that we've done. A great many people get this in their 20s. And so therefore they are never going to have or be able to do the things that we've done in our life. So, he said, if we're in a wheelchair in our 60s, as shit as that is, we've had a really good life. And that's what I tell myself, So you're right. I've had a very active and brilliant career. And no one can take that off me. That will always, MS can't take that off me. Do I wish I could still go running and all the rest of it? Absolutely I do. But, there's no point wishing for something that can't happen. So that's how I deal with it in my head.
Right. So it's like you said, it's about finding the things you can do, which you've already talked about. So what are your plans for the future? If you're not climbing mountains, are you going to do some more fundraising? Or I can't imagine, because I know because you've already told me some of the roles that you've got in your current role, and that's obviously showing the public and all the rest of it. And I'm imagining there's probably quite a lot of stairs at the Tower of London.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, there's a lot of stairs. There's a lot of uneven ground. Everything that I hate is uneven ground, cobbles. I actually tripped up the other day in front of a load of people, which was a bit embarrassing. So I literally went sprawling across the floor. But anyway, so yeah, I've got to be honest with myself. I'm sort of. It's in my head now to retire. I'm not 100% ready to retire. It's a bit daunting, if I'm honest. But can I continue to work? Probably not. It's quite difficult. And in fact, when we did the line in state for the Queen, when we were guarding her coffin, I was horrified to find that we had to actually march down some stairs to get onto the floor, and I was so scared about tripping up and just tumbling down those stairs. Would have been awful. But I've got a very pronounced limp now, which is very obvious. If you ever saw me marching across Westminster Hall, there is a very pronounced limp. So yeah, I've got to start thinking about retirement. I do want to do some more fundraising. I'd quite like to row the Atlantic. because I was thinking about things that I wouldn't need my legs for.
That wasn't the first thing I was thinking of, but all power to you.
Well, if you're going to do it, do a big one. You know, it's got to be done, and I'd quite like to do that with 3 other disabled people. You know, because I could count on both fingers, or both fingers on both hands, how many people I know that have rode the Atlantic. It's almost like, well, can we not think of something more challenging than that? And I'm not saying it's not challenging, but everyone's done it, sort of thing. So then I was thinking about maybe rowing the Atlantic and then cycling across America straight away. I don't know, but it would be nice to do. I just need to find 3 other idiots who were up for it. So I want to do that. But job wise, I'm quite interested in battlefield tours. I think, obviously can stand up in front of people and do tours. I'm very interested in military history, and I think I could combine both of those. I joined the Guild of Battlefield Tour Guides just to get a feel for what it is. And again, none of this is planned. This is just what I think I'd like to do, an aspiration maybe. I just thought, well, do you know what? There must be people out there I can't walk around a battlefield, and there must be loads of other people that can't walk around a battlefield for whatever reason, disability, age, whatever. So maybe look at doing them with a disabled slant on them. Look for places, look for things that we can do for people with disabilities, but still take them to battlefields and talk about what happened on these battlefields. So, yeah, just a couple of ideas in my head.
Well, first of all, if there's 3 idiots out there, your phrase, not mine, that want to fancy rowing the Atlantic with Andy, and I bet you there's quite a few that might take you up on that offer. There's another request. So, and obviously if you do attempt this, do let us know, because obviously we'd like to support you in some way, shape or form. And in terms of the battlefield tours, I kind of like the way you're talking about that, because it's kind of you're building upon your own experiences. Obviously, you've served in the Royal Marines. You've got the gift of the gab when it comes to doing the tours and all the rest of it. But also, you kind of owned the word disabled there in a way I wasn't necessarily expecting, and I think that's a really positive message. And I think we need more of that kind of thing in society, don't we? Let's be absolutely honest.
Yeah, I'm all about. I mean, it's quite difficult sometimes to see yourself say I'm disabled, but I am, and I'm trying to think of a way of saying this without annoying certain people. But one of my sort of MS journey, I've met so many amazing people that people I would never have met had I not got MS, and there've been some really people that have inspired me actually. But I've also met a couple who were kind of victims, and I find that difficult to deal with. People who sort of feel sorry for themselves, and it's very unfair of me because of my military background, because of my sort of you don't get into the Royal Marines if there's not an element of determination about you, that sort of thing. So I've clearly got that in me, that determination. And I'm not sort of blowing smoke up my own backside. I think that's in us all. But there are people who don't have that, and that's not their fault. But I find that quite draining. So I'm all about sort of being positive about it and helping other people be positive as well. And one of my reasons for climbing Mont Blanc was to demonstrate to other people with MS, but maybe with a disability, that it doesn't have to be the end of your life.
Yeah.
And though you might not be able to climb an actual physical mountain, whatever your mountain in life is, you could probably surprise yourself and get up it. And like I say, not a physical mountain, but whatever you perceive to be a mountain, go and have a go at it. And I think that's where my head is.
It's almost like other people can tap into your determination, I think, isn't it? And you can do it. No, I don't think you do it for them, but you know what I mean. It's kind of your determination, your skills, experience, and helping the community, I suppose, is the best way to describe it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I like doing that as well. I do, and if I can inspire one person to do something that they didn't think they could do, I would see that as a massive win.
I could not agree more. I think that's the perfect way to end this podcast. And I think that's a great message. So if you do try any of these crazy things that you're planning, like the obvious choice of rowing across the Atlantic, please let us know, and we'll definitely sort of splash it on social media and all the rest of it.
Yeah,
and I just want to thank you for your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's lovely to talk to you.
Now, before Steve and Tip chat about what we've just heard, you may be interested to know that here at Company of Makers, we've got loads of online activities for veterans to get involved in. As well as this podcast, we've got online talks with inspiring guests. And we've got workshops where you can have a go at things like drawing, writing and photography. To register your interest, just head over to companyofmakers.com/workshops. Now, back to Steve and Tip.
Well, that was quite a remarkable story. A match of two halves, I think.
Well, I mean, that's what I said at the start. It's a unique story, as everyone's story are. But with Andy's, it's just, I think it's important for all our listeners just to understand the reality of war and also the challenges he's faced on coming back.
Mm. So, how would you reflect on that, Tip? What are the points that kind of stand out in your mind?
I think it's, although it's a story of a soldier or a Marine Commando on the front line, it's just similarities. It's human beings. It goes to the rehearsals, working with people from even though we're very like-minded, like working with the US Special Forces. How the rehearsals are prevalent and really important to gel those people together before they go on the ground. And we're all aware that Operation Telic and the invasion of Iraq was an unpopular war. I mean, it's still constantly in the press. And when he was talking about his mum being in a demonstration, I was like, oh, strangely, my partner and my children were at a demonstration, and I think one of my kids went, they're all sitting down in the road, Mum. Should we sit down? And one of the young ones went, no, we'll get arrested by the police. And so that's why, when we were on the ground, we understand that. And that their loved ones or their partners are on a ground, in an environment where they're going to be probably fighting in battles and their life's going to be at risk. And people are still demonstrating. So I think for our loved ones, it was a really hard time for them.
Mm. I think it does feel like one of those moments in a film, doesn't it? When you're kind of, your phrase, on the start line, and then you've got the juxtaposition of what's going on back at home with family and stuff. It's quite an interesting contrast, isn't it? And
it's, I suppose, it's a generational thing. There's conflicts not in our memories that didn't have that 24-hour news getting piped in, and we could sort of, even on the ground there in the desert camps, we still got the buzz. We still knew what was happening. We still got information, and we knew what was going on back in the UK before we actually went over the line as such, or off the start line, as you say.
So, yeah, that's quite important to realise, isn't it? Because it does feel, 20 years ago, it feels to me like it was yesterday, but also it feels like a long time ago, because militarily speaking, so much has happened since then. And it's difficult sometimes to appreciate that a lot of this was televised, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was televised, but I also get to me, it still seems like, because it was such a pivotal part of my life as a Royal Marine and, the friends I lost, it feels like, will always feel like yesterday to me. But the way we've moved on, I think that was the start of our investment in technology and iStar and conventional warfare really moved up a gear into a more digital battlefield. And things we learned on operations in Telic through to Herrick in Afghanistan have, I think, it's not even evolution, I'd say revolutionized modern warfare and the way we do our things, which is, it's scarily far more surgical, but far more lethal as well.
Yeah, and a couple of other episodes will refer to that as well in sort of the change in equipment and methods of operation, if that's the right phrase. I think kind of what impressed me, if that's the right word about this, was the way he told the story. It wasn't. It was done in a very professional way, wasn't it? He was definitely recounting an experience. He wasn't trying to sensationalize anything.
what for me Andy exudes is Commando ethos and our core ethos. He was respectful in his role as a troop sergeant. He was the dad of his organisation. The guys looked to him, they respected him, and he was their wisdom. And he did. He treated them like they were his own, like his own children, and that's important. But also going through pretty traumatic experiences. It was that humour in the face of adversity. I mean, he was continually, he always. Even the challenges he had after operations and life in the Corps, he's always a glass half full. He's always leaning forward. He's very respectful. I think even to the people that he killed or injured in conflict, there's a level of respect, and he has no malice towards these people. But he was doing his job, and that's something that he's reconciled with himself, and he's able to move forward. And like I say, for me, Andy he's the epitome of what a Royal Marines Commando is.
The responsibility of the lads, which is a phrase I've heard you use a few times. How do you carry that? I mean, because it's quite a responsibility having other people's lives, isn't it? That you're in your care, the dad, as you just put it.
Well, the direction I got when I was a young corporal, and my first company sergeant major as a young mountain leader corporal, he's a good friend. He's still a good friend. He's an incredible man. And he just said to me, he said, like, Tip, you treat your guys like your family, your children. Whatever level of command you're at, they're your kids. So the fact is, if they're doing well, you encourage them, you mentor them, they move them forward, you give them what's right and wrong. And if they're, a bit naughty or, then you put them on the straight and narrow. So there's a certain level of firmness where, you have to direct them so that they will, like I say, bloom and grow in life, but have that direction and know what's good and bad and what's right and wrong. Simple things, but for young Marines, are very, very capable young people. They exude confidence, but they definitely need that steerage, that direction to make sure that you harness their strengths and make sure it gets focused in the right direction, and they grow in their career. And Andy does that in spades.
With that euphemism of put them on the straight and narrow, I don't want to know what that means.
I know it is a euphemism, yeah. But again, it depends on the level of your firm, but fair. It depends on the firmness, what level you take that with young Marines. But let's just say there's different ways and means of keeping them on that straight and narrow.
I'm sure there is. I'm absolutely sure there is. But in later life, things took a very, very unexpected turn for Andy, didn't they? Yeah,
and for somebody who's been a friend for such a long time, and he's a big, he's a big lad, he's a big, strong, like Royal Marine. To have that, and I went to visit him in his home in the Tower of London, and he just sat and chatted about it, and he was so strong and positive. He knew it was going to be degenerative, but he took it as another mission, another task, and that mindset that he gained from being who he is and the conditioning and strengths he gained from being in service, they shine through. He is a glass half full, and he will remain that. And I'm like, I hope, no doubt he'll probably outlive me anyway, stubborn old git that he is.
So I kind of like the idea, the way he talked about being diagnosed with MS and his solution was to go and climb a mountain.
Yeah. That was an adventure I couldn't at the time be part of because I was working. But a few of my comrades and friends did. And he did speak to one guy who also has MS. Is another friend of mine who actually was on that expedition with him. Both are extremely good characters, which and I've shared a few wets with them, and we've had great crack and banter. So seeing these two pretty robust Royal Marines having MS was it's quite a scary thing. But that adventure, and he pushed himself to the limits to climb Mont Blanc, and he even admits himself he got to the stage where his body was giving up on him, and his mind wasn't. His mind goes, why are you doing this to me? That challenge inside the head, you take for granted, ownership and control your body. And for somebody as strong and as independent and robust as Andy to be, to no longer have that was hard for him. But again, his acceptance of a challenge, I think that goes into his background. It's not going to be a small one, is it? It's not going. He's going to walk down and get a pint of milk. He's going to climb Mont Blanc, and that to me that shines through who Andy is.
I'm kind of more in the going to get a pint of milk department, if I'm absolutely honest.
Yeah, but you probably do that on your electric bike as well.
Shh, don't tell him about that. Trying to create a certain impression. But back to Andy, I think, we talked about, didn't he, sort of ending up flat on his face because he fell over at the tower. And I was just thinking, that would be a pretty embarrassing experience for anybody to fall over in front of a group of people, whatever the cause of it. But I think his attitude and his determination and the way he's able to laugh at that, and like he said, he has his dark moments, but I thought, he's really digging deep to sort of see himself through this, isn't he?
Completely. His life experience and what he's experienced, I think you put everything into, it's all relative, isn't it, in a certain way. It's like, it's not even the same thing, but it's just when you've experienced when you've had the experiences that Andy's had, he's still alive. He's still alive. He's stumbled over. He's completely reconciled to what his condition is. And he's able to brush himself up and stand up. Who's going to laugh or say anything to him going, in some way sort of like him? Because you're going, he is who he is from his life experience, from his conditioning. So his confidence as a person is, and hope, and long may it be that way, it stays, that's part of his strength. And that confidence and that appetite for challenge is what's going to get him through this, massive challenge.
I wouldn't rule out him climbing another mountain, though, to be quite honest.
But remember, he is heavy weapons, and me being a mountain leader, I'm like that. Normally, he gets a nosebleed when he gets about 200 feet out of the car park. And, going, are you sure about that, Andy? He's going to give me loads of grief for that one, by the way.
And I think you know that as well.
I know, it does make me chuckle, though.
So he hasn't got a right to respond. But yes, it was an absolutely fascinating story. And I really admire his determination. And it'd be great if he does these battlefield tours as well.
No, he's an extremely good talker, and he's very knowledgeable. He's extremely knowledgeable, and I do know a lot of friends that are in that field. So when I link up with Andy again, which should be in the near future after we broadcast this, I'll give him some signposts because he will be a massively valuable asset.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I just want to say thanks to Andy and thank you for your time, Tip.
No, thank you, Andy. Always a joy and never a chore. Thanks very much. Cheers, Anstey.
Before you go, if you're a member of the Armed Forces community and need support with your mental health, Op Courage can help. Use the link in this podcast description for details. Or you can phone the Combat Stress Helpline on 0800 138 1619. If you'd like to contact us, email studio@companyofmakers.com.
Finally, we're giving a really big shout out to our funders, the Royal Navy and Royal Marines Charity, and the Armed Forces Covenant Fund Trust. Thank you.
This podcast was produced by Rachel Owen, hosted by Tip Cullen and me, recorded and edited by yours truly.
Company of Makers. Podcast Talks Workshops.